Nespresso machine was still warm when I walked through the front door. I noticed it the way you notice small things when your body already knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. The kind of noticing that happens in the chest before it reaches the brain. 2 pods in the recycling bin. 2 cups rinsed and turned upside down on the drying rack. Someone had even wiped the counter. My husband never wiped the counter. I had come home 2 days early from a design conference in Portland. A last-minute flight, a middle seat, turbulence over Denver. I texted him from the gate that I was on my way. He hadn't replied, which wasn't unusual. He often left his phone in his jacket pocket during the day. I set my rolling suitcase against the wall and stood in the kitchen for a moment listening. The house had a particular silence when it was empty. I had lived in it for 6 years and I knew the sound of its emptiness the way you know a person's breathing in the dark. This wasn't that silence. This was the silence of something held. I heard the creak of the 3rd step from the top of the staircase. The one we had always meant to fix. I didn't move. I set my keys down on the counter without letting them make a sound, and I stood there, and I listened, and I understood. I want to be clear about what I did next. Because later, when I told my sister, when I told my attorney, when I told myself over and over in the months that followed, I needed to understand it too. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't throw open the bedroom door. I didn't scream or cry or make myself known in any way. What I did instead was reach into my bag, take out my phone, and open the camera app. I walked to the bottom of the stairs. I pressed record. I stood there for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. That is how long it took to capture everything I needed. Voices, laughter, a name said in a register I had never heard my husband use with me, not once in 6 years. A name that was not mine. Then I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my keys, and went to my car. I drove to my sister's apartment on the other side of the city, and I sat in her parking lot for 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside. My sister poured wine and didn't say anything for a long time, which is one of the reasons I love her. I told her everything. I played her the recording once, then I locked my phone face down on her coffee table and didn't touch it again that night. We sat until almost 2 in the morning, and by the time I drove home, my husband was asleep. I lay down next to him in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about architecture, about load-bearing walls, about which structures, when removed, cause everything else to collapse, and which ones, when removed carefully, leave the building standing. I had a daughter. She was 4 years old. Her name was Lily, and she had her father's eyes and my mother's laugh. And she was, without question, the only reason I needed to be careful. So I was careful. I said nothing. I changed nothing on the surface. I went to work. I made dinners. I attended Lily's soccer practice on Saturday mornings and stood next to my husband on the sideline and watched our daughter run toward the ball with total abandon. I smiled. I was present. I was a woman with a plan. I transferred $30,000 from our joint savings into an account my husband didn't know about. I had a consultation with a family law attorney, a woman recommended by my sister's colleague, and I paid her retainer in cash. I forwarded 3 months of my husband's phone records, ones I had accessed through our shared wireless plan, to her office. I backed up the video to a private cloud account, a secondary email address, and a USB drive I kept in a box of tampons under the bathroom sink. I want to say I was cold about it. I wasn't. I cried in the shower almost every morning. I cried in the parking garage before entering my office building. I cried on a Tuesday afternoon in the bathroom stall of a restaurant where I had just eaten lunch with a client, smiling for 90 minutes, presenting tile samples, nodding at her vision board. What I was not was reckless. There's a difference between grief and chaos, and I refuse to let my grief become chaos. Lily could not afford for me to fall apart, so I cried in places where it didn't cost me anything, and everywhere else I was a wall. The month I discovered the affair, I made a note of a name I had seen on my husband's phone, not from snooping. He had left it on the kitchen island while he showered, and a message had lit up the screen. A name, a woman from his firm. I had seen her at the company holiday party 2 years earlier. Sharp blazer. Sharp laugh. She had shaken my hand and told me I had beautiful taste in earrings, and I had thanked her and meant it. I wrote down her full name on a piece of paper and I put it in the same box as the USB drive. It was a month later when my husband sat across from me at the dinner table after Lily had gone to bed and told me he was worried about me. He said I seemed distant. He said I seemed anxious, closed off. He said he felt like he was losing me to something and he didn't understand what it was. He held my hand across the table. He looked sincere. He was, without question, the most convincing person I had ever known, which was something I was only now understanding had never been a compliment. He suggested therapy. Not couples therapy at first. He said that gently, carefully, just someone for me to talk to. He said he'd been asking around, that a colleague had recommended someone excellent, a woman who specialized in anxiety and life transitions. He said he just wanted me to feel like myself again. I said that sounded reasonable. I said it the way I had been saying everything for 4 weeks, evenly, without tremor, without the laugh that wanted to rise in my throat like something feral. He made the appointment. Her office was in a brick building near the river, on the 4th floor, with a waiting room that had tall windows and plants that were actually alive. She came to the door herself. She was in her late 40s, natural gray at her temples, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had a calm about her that seemed structural, like it was built in rather than performed. We shook hands. She had a firm handshake. Her last name was on the placard beside the door. I registered it the way you register background details when you're an interior designer, automatically, without attaching meaning. It was only during the drive home, stopped at a red light, that it surfaced. I sat very still at that intersection. Her last name was the same as the name on the piece of paper in the box under the bathroom sink. I told myself it was a coincidence. It's a common enough name. I told myself that for 3 days. Then I looked her up. Her practice website had an about page with a professional photograph and a short biography. It mentioned that she had grown up in the same suburb of the same city where the woman from my husband's firm had attended high school. It mentioned an older sister. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop and went to check on Lily, who was asleep with her arm around a stuffed rabbit. And I stood in the doorway of her room for a long time. I went back to the second session alone. My husband had assumed we'd go together eventually, but I told him I wanted a few individual sessions first, that I needed to find my footing, and he agreed immediately, which told me something. He wanted me sitting across from this woman. He wanted to know what I said in that room. She was a good therapist. I could see that even then. She asked careful questions. She didn't lead. She listened in a way that most people don't, with her whole body angled toward you, like you were the only thing happening in the world. I found myself wanting to trust her, which made everything harder. During that second session, I asked a question that wasn't quite a question. I said that my husband had recommended her specifically, and I was curious how he had heard of her. She said she wasn't sure, perhaps through a colleague. I asked if she had any connections to his firm. She paused briefly and said she didn't think so. I nodded. I booked a third appointment before I left. Between the second and third session, I hired a private investigator. Not to confirm the affair, I already had that. I hired her to confirm the connection between the therapist and the woman from my husband's firm. Within 4 days, she sent me a file. They were sisters. They had grown up together, been close into adulthood, though they apparently had different last names because the younger one had kept a married name from a brief first marriage. The older one, my therapist, had no apparent knowledge of the affair. There was no communication between her and my husband that the investigator could surface. She appeared to have been an unwitting referral. Unwitting. That word matters. I read the file twice. I thought about what it would cost her to know. I thought about what it would cost her to know. I thought about what it would cost me to tell her. I thought about Lily. I went to the third session. I sat down across from her and I put my hands in my lap and I said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm not here to cause harm. I'm here because I believe you deserve to know what is happening, and because I think, once you know, you'll understand why I came back. She didn't speak. She set her notepad aside. I told her everything. I told her about the 2 coffee cups. About the recording, about the name I had seen light up on his phone, about the private investigator's file, about the fact that my husband had specifically recommended her and that her sister was the woman he had been sleeping with for at least 8 months. I put my phone on the cushion between us and I played her the recording. She didn't move while it played. She sat with the stillness of someone who has trained herself not to react in front of patients, and then the recording ended and she was completely still for another 15 seconds. And then she removed her reading glasses from the top of her head and set them on the table beside her chair and pressed her fingers together in front of her mouth. She said, "I need you to give me a moment." I said, "Take as long as you need." She looked at the window. She looked at her hands. She looked at the floor. She was not performing grief. This was the real thing, the complicated kind, the kind where you are mourning not just what you've lost, but what you now know about someone you loved. I recognized it. I had been living inside it for 2 months. She said, "He sent you to me?" I said, "Yes." She said, "He thought I would." And she stopped. I said, "I think he wanted a record. I think he wanted someone with professional authority who could say, on paper, that I was struggling, that I was anxious, unstable. We have a 4-year-old daughter. I think he was building a case." She looked at me for a long time. She said, "Do you have an attorney?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Good." She called me the following week. Not as my therapist. She had referred me to a colleague and closed our professional relationship, correctly given everything. She called me as a private individual. Her voice was steady, but I could hear what was underneath it. She said she had been thinking about what her sister had knowingly participated in. Not the affair itself. That was between 2 people and their choices. What she had been thinking about was the deliberate use of a therapeutic relationship to build a legal case against a spouse. What she had been thinking about was the child. She said she had been thinking about was the child. She said she had been a therapist for 22 years. She had never violated a professional boundary. She had also never been used as a tool in someone else's scheme without her knowledge. She said she had spoken to her own attorney. She said she wanted to provide a statement to my legal team, not about anything said in our sessions. That was still protected, and she was clear about that, but about the referral itself. About the circumstances under which my husband had contacted her, which had apparently included a characterization of me that she now believed was strategic. She had notes from that intake conversation. She had documentation. I sat down on the edge of my bed when she said that. She said, "I want to be clear that I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because it's right. And because I have a niece who deserves better than to have her life arranged like a chessboard by the people who are supposed to protect her." I said I understood. I said thank you. She said, "Take care of your daughter." And she hung up. The divorce proceeding was set for a Thursday in November. The leaves were down by then, the city gray and bright, at the same time the way it gets in late autumn. That particular quality of light that makes everything look both sharper and more exposed. My attorney had spent 2 weeks preparing. We had the recording. We had the phone records. We had the PI's documentation of the affair, including time-stamped photographs. We had the statement from the therapist, which outlined in clinical, precise language that my husband had initiated the referral by describing his wife as exhibiting signs of paranoia and emotional instability, that he had framed her behavior in terms designed to establish a pattern, and that this framing was, in her professional opinion, inconsistent with anything she had observed in our sessions. We also had something my attorney had found independently, something I hadn't even known to look for. A document my husband had drafted, saved in a shared cloud folder that he had forgotten I still had access to, that outlined, in bullet points, a strategy for demonstrating my psychological unfitness as a parent. He had made a list. He had planned this with the same organizational discipline he applied to financial models. The woman from his firm had proofread it. Her edits were still visible in the revision history. My husband's attorney spent the first 40 minutes of that proceeding on the offensive. He spoke about my emotional state, my distance, my anxiety, my behavior in the months leading up to the filing. He referenced my therapy. He made it sound like concern. My attorney let him finish. Then she introduced the documents. I watched my husband's face change while she read from the intake summary. I watched him look at his attorney, who looked back at him with an expression I recognized, the expression of someone who has just realized they were not given the full picture. I watched him look at the table. I watched him not look at me. His attorney asked for a recess. In the hallway, I stood with my sister, who had taken the day off work, who had driven me here that morning and stood outside the Nespresso machine moment with me 2 months earlier when I called her from my car. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my arm, and we stood by the window that overlooked the parking garage and waited. When we went back in, the terms changed. The house. The custody arrangement. The financial settlement. Everything that had been structured to minimize what I walked away with was quietly, systematically restructured. My husband signed without looking up. I drove to pick up Lily from my mother's afterward. She was wearing a purple coat and rain boots with frogs on them, and she ran toward me across the front yard, with both arms out like she always does. Like every reunion is the best thing that's ever happened to her. I caught her and held on longer than usual, my face in her hair, which smelled like the baby shampoo she still insists on, and I breathed in and breathed out and let myself feel the full weight of what the last 4 months had cost. Then I set her down and we went inside and had soup, and she told me a long, intricate story about something that had happened at preschool involving a lizard and a misunderstanding, and I listened to every word. That night, after she was asleep, I sat in the kitchen alone. The same kitchen where I had stood with my keys in my hand and my heart already knowing. The Nespresso machine was dark. I had replaced both cups months ago. I thought about the therapist. I thought about what it takes to choose honesty over loyalty. Not the easy kind of loyalty. Not loyalty to a stranger, but loyalty to your own blood, your own sister, the person who grew up in the same house you did. I thought about how much that choice must have cost her. I thought about how she had made it anyway, not for me, but because it was right. I ordered flowers the next morning. No note. I just sent them to her office address. Something simple, nothing that required a response or created an obligation. I don't know if she understood. I think she probably did. My sister asked me once, months later, over coffee in a diner we'd been going to since our 20s, whether I was angry. Not at my husband. She assumed that. At the situation. At the 2 years of our marriage that preceded what I discovered. At all the meals and vacations and Saturday mornings on that soccer sideline that I now understood had existed inside a lie. I thought about it for a moment. I told her I had been, for a while, the kind of anger that lives in your sternum and hums there constantly, that colors everything the same flat gray. I had been angry at the obvious target, my husband, the woman who had proofread his list. But I had also been angry at myself, at the ways I had explained away what I'd sensed, at the ways I had adjusted myself to fit a shape I should have questioned. What I was now, I told her, was not angry. What I was now, I clear. She asked me what the difference felt like. I thought about Lily's rain boots, about the late November light on the courthouse steps, about a woman I would never see again who had pressed her fingers together in front of her mouth and sat with real grief in a room she thought was safe, and then chosen, quietly, without being asked twice, to do the harder thing. I told my sister it felt like a room with all the furniture moved out. Cold at first, a little echoey. But you can see the walls now, the actual walls. You can see where the damage is, and you can decide what to keep and what to build instead. She nodded. She poured more coffee. Outside, it had started to rain. The soft, steady kind that doesn't announce itself, that just arrives and settles in, and the city through the window was bright and blurred and entirely ordinary, and I sat there and let myself belong to it. Lily had a soccer game the next morning. I had already bought the umbrella.